mean, we're going to the 80s now. I guess we're kind of in the 80s now in our conversation.
Yeah, we're stepping into the 80s now.
Yeah. So let's step in the 80s of Shocking Dark. So in the 80s, there was a very big film called Terminator. James Cameron, talking back to James Cameron again. And so what happened was, the story is, and there's numerous stories about this happened, but when you look at the film, I think this might be what happened. Someone went, hey, this James Cameron kid, because he's really young, he's making some good movies. You gotta give me a James Cameron film. Some producer that the Bruno Mattei and his guys. And they go, all right, yeah, we'll give you that James Cameron film. So they'll go to the movies, and they watch the James Cameron film at the time, and they make Shocking Dark. And eventually, what happens is, as the story goes, at one point they start looking at what they have. And the producer goes, "No, I mean the other James Cameron film. I mean Aliens." And he goes, "Oh, or it was no, he's sorry. They saw Aliens, and the producer meant Terminator. So this whole film is a big ripoff of Aliens. And in the last 20 minutes, a Terminator shows up out of nowhere, like out of nowhere, a Terminator, and there's time travel, and in the last 20 minutes, run like sandwiched in so hard. You're like, what in the world is? Wait, is this a Terminator film or an Aliens film or whatever? So it's called Shocking Dark. In Japan, it is known as Alienators as well, or sometimes it's called Terminator 2 as well. So, Shocking Dark,
Alienator. That's brilliant.
Alienators, Terminator 2, or Shocking Dark. Never released in America, never, because it rips off Aliens, it rips off Terminator. It claimed to be Terminator 2 at all the film markets. James Cameron, imagine, was selling off Terminator 1 at the film markets. He shows up, and someone else, or he just done Terminator 1, he goes, and someone's like, "Oh, we've got Terminator 2," and he's like, "I never wrote Terminator 2. What are you talking about?" He goes, "No, this is Terminator 2 right here." And he goes, "Well, what's this?" And it's a ripoff of Aliens as well. And it's imagine seeing that, just being like the goal. And again, that's Bruno Mattei, the same man behind Cruel Jaws. So yeah, very interesting human being. When you start watching his films, I warn you, you go down the rabbit hole, and you're like, what's wrong with this man? Like,
I'd love to see what he looks like. Is he just a rip-off of other people as well, you know?
Oh no, he looks when you see interviews with him, he's really grumpy usually, but he has a partner in crime called Claudio Fervaso, I think is his name. And that guy was his writer. So like Claudio Fervaso later went on to direct a film called Troll 2. I don't know if you ever heard of that. Troll 2 is a legendary, like that. Oh my God, clip. That guy directed that. So you can understand what kind of people we're hanging out with here. Yeah, no. And they made, talking about Zombie Due earlier, they made eventually, Lucio Fulci was, the guys were like, well, Zombie Due really well, which in Italy was Zombie Due, because apparently that was a ripoff. That was a supposed part 2 of Night of the Living Dead, which it wasn't. So in another place called Zombie, or Zombie Flesh Eater. But eventually the producers of Zombie Due go, okay, Zombie Due was a hit. You have to make Zombie 3. So the third zombie film. So Lucio Fulci goes, okay, where am I filming? He goes, the Philippines. All right. So they go to the Philippines, and Lucio Fulci is not doing well because his health is declining. So eventually he shoots this movie, and it starts, and Lucio Fulci is a horror filmmaker, but he's quite artistic. Like, he knows his camera angles and his shots and everything else. But his health is declining, and at one point he gets argument with the producers, and he eventually ends up shooting like 20-minute canoeing scenes and stuff like that just to tick the producers off and fulfill his contract. And what happens is the producers see the rushes and go, well, this won't do, this is a mess. And Fulci leaves the production because of the health reasons, and they go, man, I got to finish off this movie, like this, you know, this crazy Italian zombie film. He's like, who do I know that could finish these things off and do in like 0 time? He goes, Bruno Mattei. So they get Bruno Mattei in, and then along comes Claudio Fervaso, and those two guys finish off this artsy style, what was going to be an artsy zombie film, and it becomes the most insane, manic, yet over the top, fun, guilty pleasure films you've ever seen. Zombie 3. It is batshit crazy. Stuff's blowing up. You've got zombie birds running around. It's flying zombie heads end up showing up. It is a very, very strange film, but it's hilarious, and it's so much fun. So that's a film I would have loved to see at a drive-in movie. I'd like to see both those films back to back. Zombie Due is a genuinely good film. Zombie 3 is not a very good film, but my God, is it a lot of fun. So
okay, cool. Ridiculous. That sounds
cool.
Good.
Soundtrack too.
I've got for the 80s, Poltergeist.
Yeah, Poltergeist. So again, Poltergeist. You know the story behind Poltergeist about Toby Hooper supposedly directed it, but I've spoken to some people in the industry as well because I've heard the story for a long time. Toby Hooper apparently did not direct that film. Steven
Mm.
Spielberg actually directed it.
Did he?
Well, yeah, but at the time, well, this is the story, and I've spoken to some people who've worked on it. I think Mike Leader knows some people on it as well. But you have to double check with him. I can't speak for him, but he apparently Toby Hooper was hired to kind of ghost direct it because Steven Spielberg had done all the fluffy, warm
Yeah.
movies. He can't go out and direct a horror movie. It doesn't work for his brand. So they go, oh, okay, well, we'll say that Toby directed it. And if you look at pictures from the set, which is now leaked out, and there's people have spoken about that, people are like, yeah, no, Steven Spielberg didn't come visit the set. He directed that movie. But he couldn't because of who he was, openly say that. But if you look at the film, a lot of those shots really do look like creepy Steven Spielberg, like Steven Spielberg shots, but creepy. So
Oh,
really
that's so
interesting thing about
interesting.
Poltergeist. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
really good. I like the film. I
It's a
love
good movie.
the woman who comes in, the paranormal one.
How
She's
creepy is
hilarious.
she? That
She's
high
the
voice.
yeah, she's the most frightening thing about that film.
Yeah, yeah. It is. It is. I mean, regardless of everything that happens, Indian background, she's the thing that sticks with you. Great casting.
Yeah,
Casting is horror films casting is like, at least 60% of the job. So
yeah.
big deal. Great casting there.
The Shining.
Yeah. First time I saw The Shining, I was in a hotel in Davos, Switzerland, and it was snowing all around it, and it was a large old hotel, and there was a bunch of kids who were watching it in like this lounge area, and it scared the living bejesus out of me.
Yeah,
So
I bet.
great movie, The Shining. I like some of Stanley Kubrick's films. I don't like all of them. A lot of people are like, no, 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 you got to say you love all. Well, I don't like all his films, but I sure as hell like The Shining. I think it's a
Yeah,
wonderful film.
yeah,
So
brilliant.
it's
I
really
was
creepy.
I was meant to be at the Stanley Hotel this year. We've had to put the
Oh,
trip off till next year. So
COVID striking again, but there's 2021, so keep hope for it
yes.
all. But yeah, when you go, definitely post pictures on the Instagram and all of
Oh,
that.
definitely, definitely. The Thing,
Wow.
that's from the 80s. I know you like
Yes.
that one.
Yeah.
Finally, The Fly.
Okay, so David Cronenberg's The Fly, remake again, right? Good film. Jeff Goldblum being Jeff Goldblum. I love Jeff Goldblum. I think he's amazing. Talking about casting, what perfect casting. Great makeup effects, really fun
Yeah.
film. A good body horror film. Yeah, I really enjoy that film. If we're gonna talk about films from the 80s, in terms of body horror, another film I think has a lot of good melting stuff is Hellraiser.
Oh,
I'm
yes, yes.
good old UK film right there, right? I
Yeah,
mean, shot in the UK, not made for very much, but oh my god, there's a producer I can't say very much about. We have some plans called Nick Ford, and he knows some of the people who worked on that first Hellraiser film. He's
yes,
with Hex Studios and stuff in Scotland, and Nick and I may be planning a few things. In 2021, but he knows people on that, and that's his favorite movie, and he knows everything about it. If you ever want someone on here who can tell you a lot about Hellraiser, that is
yeah,
a gentleman right there who can very much do. But I love that. Excellently done. First film, really nice debut film. Great acting, and made by a bunch of people who are involved in doing stage plays originally. And it looks a bit like a film that could be made for stage if you look at it. I mean,
oh,
very few locations, in a creepy attic. Really, really great film. And again, a film about innocence, and there it is
yeah.
again. So
Oh,
a recurring theme.
that definitely needs to be on the list, doesn't it? Right,
Oh yeah.
the 90s.
Well, if we can just stick with the 80s for
Have you got
one more.
more 80s
I've got
recommendations?
I've got a couple. Well, for the 80s, I think I got a few more. I'm going to go through them very quickly. So I've got The Fog, again, John Carpenter.
Oh, of
Um,
course. Yes.
we don't see very many films involved. We got The Mist, but not much fog stuff going on in the world. I mean, it's a bit of a hard concept to copy because it's called literally The Fog. But like,
Yeah.
and you got The Mist, which I think is also kind of funny because
Yeah,
give me The Fog, The Mist. Yeah, sure, go with it. Write that movie.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
another in terms of vampire films, we had quite a few good vampire films, and in my mind, if you're going to go for the top 2 vampire films of the 80s, maybe top 3 vampire films of the 80s. You've got Lost Boys. Okay, well, Lost Boys were
Yes,
good.
yeah,
I mean, again, I can't stress how much I prefer 80s vampire films. I mean, you've got Twilight, you're all shiny, and Keith Sutherland's like, we
Yeah,
must feed. Another
yeah.
great 80s horror film is by it's called Near Dark. Have you ever seen Near Dark?
No, I haven't.
It's okay. Imagine a western. It's not a western, but it takes kind of place in what feels almost like it has a western like vibe about it. The word vampire is never said, but it is a dark, wonderful vampire film. Very, very good. And then comes a vampire film, which I mean, if you haven't seen Fright Night, have you seen Fright
Oh
Night?
yes.
Oh,
Yes.
Brad Fidel on the soundtrack there. Dun 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 dun. I love Brad Fidel.
Brilliant.
He
Yeah.
also did the Terminator soundtrack. He did True Lies later on for James Cameron. True Lies
Oh wow.
soundtrack sounds a bit like what was I gonna say? Friday Night soundtrack, but really, really, really cool. I love Fright Night. It's kind of campy, but it's fun. And I think talk about perfect casting for film. Everybody in that film is absolutely perfect for the roles that they play. Really,
Cool.
really, really good. So I'm gonna go down the list again. Dead Kids, another exploitation film. Really, really,
Okay.
really good. Then there's well, of course, Nightmare on Elm Street. We got to go with Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger.
Yeah.
And then there's an Italian film again I'm going to recommend called Demons. And if you
Right.
love, and we were talking before how we love movie theaters and I love going to the cinema. Demons is a movie in which a movie theater gets infested by a demon outbreak and no one can escape. And it eventually ends up inside a movie theater, really good makeup. And I'm just going to tell you about one scene in there. At one point, the hero's riding in a motorbike through a movie theater with a katana, a Japanese sword in his hand, slicing down demons while riding a motorbike in a movie theater. Has to be seen to be believed. Really,
Cool.
really, really cool. Back to Australia again. We got to talk about if you like Jaws. I'm going to take your Jaws and I'm going to say Razorback. Have you ever heard of this film?
No.
You're going to laugh.
I've missed so many.
You're going to laugh, but it's really cool. And it's when you see it, you're going to be like, this is awesome. So take Jaws. Take Ridley Scott's visual aesthetic,
Right.
and go the Australian outback and turn Jaws into a giant wild pig.
Is this like a Cujo ripoff?
No, it's a Jaws ripoff on land. It's a giant wild pig and it kills people, and it's a really gory film. I mean, there's an uncensored version which eventually I think will get released, but really, really cool movie. A lot of people don't know about it. Visually stunning film. Like it looks absolutely, a lot of great smoke, and very Ridley Scott used to smoke and light and everything's really cool. And it actually works. And there's some hilarious scenes about it, about this giant pig going through somebody's house and ripping the house in half. And the guy just sitting there drinking a beer. And it's like, oh, what's that? Like it's an amazing movie. So Razorback, and a lot of people don't know about it. And I have the Blu-ray, rare Blu-ray, really cool. And then I'm going to go for 3 more films. I've got a really cool slasher film that very few people know about called The Prowler. And it was the debut of, or one of the debuts of a makeup artist named Tom Savini, who would go on and do like, you know, a lot of the Romero zombie films. He did Maniac. He did all these really cool movies. And Tom Savini is really great. And The Prowler is an early slasher film, and it really shows up. It's 1980 or 81, I think. It's early 80s. Looks like a 70s film. Really grimy and stuff. Very cool slasher film. Really fun. Then we're going to have to give Roger Corman a shout out. Of course, the classic producer with Humanoids from the Deep. Have you ever seen that movie?
No, again.
Fisherman. Okay, it's basically a fisherman's town gets run over by, I guess, finned-like characters, like these swampy frog-like men, little seamen come out and they kill everybody in the town and everything else. It's really cool. Like, I don't want to say too much about it, but it's really cool. Like, and then we're going to go off to Japan for our last 2 recommendations. One is a very awesome film, which way preludes the movie Saw, but basically is a Japanese movie called Evil Dead Trap. Really cool synthesizer soundtrack as well. And it's kind of like Saw before Saw. So a bunch of people, they hear a news crew goes to an abandoned maze-like factory to find out more about like these creepy videotapes that are being sent. And they investigate this place, and there are traps everywhere. Evil traps, evil dead traps. Say. And the guys who set up these traps is basically lure them there, and they get into these really strange situations. But the ending of the film is super cool, and you can't see it coming, and it has such a damn cool ending. So I'm so sure that whoever saw it, well, I'm not so sure, I can't say that for sure, but I'm guessing some people who were behind Saw may have seen Evil Dead Trap. Such a cool.
Okay.
And then the last film I'm going to recommend is actually an anime from the I think his name is Yoshikawa Kawajiri, called Wicked City, which is an anime, a neo-noir anime with demons and everything in it, really nicely hand drawn. Some over-the-top sexual themes in it as well, so definitely not for young people. But Wicked City is absolutely fantastic.
Right.
It looks stunning. It's really cool. And it's a film that was supposed to be an animated short film that was about 20-30 minutes, and the producers were so stunned with what the director was doing. He later would go on to do Wicked, Ninja Scroll, and Cyber City, Adeo 808, and all those things. Basically, his stuff was so good, they're like, look, your stuff is so great, we're giving you more money to make this film longer. So Wicked City, highly recommend. And that's an anime. You don't see many people talk about anime when it comes to horror.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
but very much for adults, that film. Definitely not for like the kids. Not at all. No.
That sounds really good. 1990s. We've got
Yeah, give me your list.
Scream.
Love it. Well, that we had to mention Nightmare on Elm Street because Wes Craven comes back with Scream. I love Scream. Scream is one of my favorite scripts ever written. I never I've ever read the Scream script.
I've not read the script. Good.
Written in 3 days. The feature
You're
film script.
Joking.
Yeah, start to end. Scream was written. Kevin Williams, really, really tight script, really functional script, by the way. My two favorite screenplays of all time are Scream. I love that. And I love the screenplay for Escape from New York. Not a horror film, but a John Carpenter film.
Oh, I remember. Yeah. You recommended that to me once to read.
I think, yeah. So Scream and Escape from New York, I've read a lot of screenplays, but those are really good because I'm a big fan of functional screenplays. Like, not very wordy. They tell you what you should do, and they're quick and they're very visual. And both Scream and Escape from New York, like, I think Escape from New York may have been written probably really functionally and quickly as well. But both Scream and Escape from New York are excellent scripts. And I love Scream. I saw that as a kid. Now, I remember when I was in high school when Scream came out. So Scream came out, what, in 1998, I think? Maybe?
Yeah. The end of the 90s.
Yeah, 1998 and stuff.
Courtney Cox was already massive, wasn't she, in Friends?
Yeah, she was in Friends, and it was her trying to get away from a lot of stars in that era. And in the 90s, when you look at all movies, we're trying to transition through horror films. I mean, let's not forget in the 80s, it happened with Johnny Depp transitioning through things like, Nightmare on Elm Street and everything.
Yeah.
So people tend to jump away from from television through horror movies because horror movies sell really well and you can get your audience going. But Scream, I remember I was in high school and everybody was talking about it. They're like, oh my God, how violent is it? And because for my generation, because I was born in 1981, so I didn't see slasher films in the cinema. But for my generation, Scream was the beginning of slasher films for my generation, being able to see them in movie theaters. And then after you got films like I Know What You Did Last Summer, another Kevin Williams film called Teaching Mrs. Tingle came out. All those kind of movies started coming out, but Scream was the genesis of that happening again. And interestingly enough, it was from a master who made Nightmare on Elm Street. So, and I think slasher films, they were really dead for a while, but I think that kind of kicked them up again. And I suspect it a few years after COVID-19, we're going to see them again as well. They come back every like 20 or so years.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting, slasher films. But again, slasher films are very much about innocence. About like growing up, coming of age, and all that stuff. So those films really, really do work. So I love Scream. I think it's a fantastic movie.
Okay, I've got the Blair Witch Project.
Okay, so the Blair Witch Project, I loved it. It scared the bejesus out. I didn't see it in the cinema at the time for reasons I think I just moved to maybe Italy at the time. And there was no English-speaking cinemas, or maybe it was. For some reason, I hadn't seen it in the cinema, so I watched it by myself one day at home on a videotape. And there was a huge thunderstorm outside, and it scared the bejesus out of me. And I was like, "Oh, that's so scary." But this is where the story gets interesting. So I was speaking to a friend of mine. I have some friends from Finland. Speaking to a friend of mine from Finland, and I go, "Did you see Blair Witch?" And he goes, "Oh, that's such a funny movie." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And apparently, the Blair Witch, according to him, the Blair Witch didn't do too well in Finland because the forests in Finland are so dense compared to
Oh,
what is seen in Blair Witch. The people are like, oh, how can you not find your way, you stupid people? So people didn't
yeah.
take it, didn't land well in Finland at all. When it comes to marketing, true, like, all kind of like a weird augmented reality thing. I mean, they had the fake, like, you know, people actually thought they were going to watch a snuff film there. I mean, if you think about how disturbing that is, that's really strange. Oh, we're going to go see people die on screen. So,
Yeah.
but Scream, yeah, great movie, great movie.
Okay. With the Blair Witch Project, took 8 days to shoot,
Yeah,
which
it,
I think that's pretty fast, right?
that's ridiculously fast. I mean, Saw it was also pretty quick as well. I can't remember how quickly they shot Saw, but I think they shot the first Saw film. But yeah, Blair. I mean, DV cameras, you don't have to reload the film, so that's really nowadays
Yeah.
we're all shooting digital. Back then, that must be crazy. But with films like that, you've got to remember Blair Witch took 8 days to shoot. Very correct. But you can shoot a film like Blair Witch in 8 days if you prepare it correctly.
Right.
I think if you prepare a film I'd like to know how long it took them to prepare that movie as opposed to shoot it, because a lot of stuff is like single take as well. Don't forget, like, there's not a
Yeah.
lot of editing and cutting going on.
Mm,
You're not going like, okay, well, let's make sure we don't cross the 180 line. I mean, one scene, I love the scene in the tent when the hands are feeling against the tent. I mean, talk about cheap scares, but it really does work.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
ideas work the
Yeah.
best. But so it doesn't surprise me it took 8 days, but I'm very curious to find out how long it took them to prepare that movie. I suspect it was a long time. But again, I mean, it was made for very, very cheap. So, and it
60
preparation
grand.
costs nothing. Yeah, preparation
60
costs
grand.
nothing. It took down John Carpenter's Halloween as the most profitable independent film of all time. I think of that after that.
Oh, right. Okay. It
So
made
yeah,
248 million.
yeah. So there we go. So that, what does that say? But that's a very interesting subject to bring up, because horror, if you talk to a lot of horror producers, low budget horror films make the most money. It's no coincidence that, I mean, things like Avengers make tons of money, but they cost a lot to make. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? But if you're talking about very little bang for buck, I mean, a lot of bang for very little buck. Sorry, you got to look toward horror, and that's
Yeah.
why a lot of stars, when they first come out and they want to, like, you want to cross over, like Courtney Cox or George Clooney with the Fantastic from Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah.
they make those films, because
Yeah.
there's somewhat of a guarantee of making your money back. There's such a large built-in audience, very most profitable genre around in terms of like that.
Yeah. That's so interesting to know, really. I would have thought of Christmas films and stuff like that, but it must be horror films.
Well, yeah, but Christmas films are very dedicated to a time of year, and you have a very small window in which you can really make your money back. But a
Yeah.
horror film, I mean, okay, we're doing this around Halloween, so yeah, okay, there's a season,
Mm,
but horror fans are rabid when it
yeah.
comes to their stuff. I mean, if you yeah, if you all year long you can make a horror film, although I have to say the worst film of the 2010s is a Christmas horror film that I saw. It's a film called Black Christmas. Did you see that by any chance? I love the original, but
No, I didn't.
they
I
made a
heard it was
remake of
pants.
it. It is one of the worst films I've ever seen in my entire life. It is. It takes I think the number 3 spot maybe for me, or something like that. Like, number 2 being Mortal Kombat Annihilation, and number 1 being, because of the amount of money they had and because they built in fan audience. Personally, I think the worst film I've ever seen has to be The Last Jedi, because of it's such a huge built-in audience, and they had so many opportunities in turn. I know you write as well, and I've written as well and stuff like that. In terms of like handling characters and everything else, The Last Jedi really, I mean, oh, subvert expectations. Have you seen Star Wars? Was what I was wondering while I was watching that. Like, it's just, I despise that film. But anyway, yeah, but Black Christmas is an awful, 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 awful film. The original is really great. It was a precursor to, like, it was a lot of people consider it the first slasher film ever made. But the Black Christmas remake is so awful. I was sitting there with a few other film producers in the cinema, and we were looking at each other just laughing out loud. We were like, I can't believe this is on screen. So, and
Wow.
that
Is that
film
bad?
deserves to be, yeah, it deserves it. It's one of those films that is so bad that I think years from now people will be looking back at it going, holy shit, this is where society was at the time. Like, it's that bad. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. God, I lost up. Right. Yeah. Candyman.
Candyman, yeah, classic. Very interesting. One of the first times we saw uh, a black man be the villain
Yeah.
in an horror film. I mean, going back to Night of the Living Dead in the 1960s, that was the first time we saw one being protagonist, and this is the first time we saw a black villain, and I think that's really cool that they did that because we hadn't seen that before, an original idea. And Tony Todd, I have all day for Tony Todd. He is a fantastic actor. He also was incidentally in the 1990s they made a remake of Night of the Living Dead, and
Right.
he played the lead in that.
Oh,
So
okay.
the remake of Night of the Living Dead is directed by Tom Savini. It's a really fun film. A lot of people panned it. I think it's great.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people panned it simply because they wanted to pan it. But great movie. So Night of the Living Dead remake
Okay.
from the 90s. Night of the Living Dead
Right.
90s is sometimes called. Yeah.
Yeah. I've got Silence of the Lambs, the last one of the 90s.
So I don't consider Silence of the Lambs a horror film. I consider Silence of the Lambs more of a psychological thriller.
Yeah.
People, Silence of the Lambs is very much a character study. Anthony Hopkins is not in the film for that long, which shows how good of an actor he truly is, and he really honed in on something terrifying. I've heard stories that Jodie Foster was creeped out by him on set. I
Yeah.
hope that's true because that's amazing. But like,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think if you really watch that film, it's a detective story. I don't think it's a horror film necessarily. I think some films are kind of on the fringe of being called horror films. I don't know. Terminator's
Yeah.
like that. The first Terminator
Yeah.
film actually a slasher film, chasing a girl, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
basically what it
Yeah.
is. And then somebody protecting her and everything else. So I think the first Terminator film is a bit of a slasher film and a romance film and everything else, and then a cyberpunk film and all that stuff. But I think some horror movies get classified. They have horror aspects to them, but they get classified in there. Um, there's a great British film called Hardware. Have you ever seen that?
No.
It kind of
Where?
came out in the Terminator era, and it's about a man who goes into the desert and finds the skull of a robot and gives it to his sculptor girlfriend, and they live in this post-apocalyptic dystopian universe, and she starts slowly putting together like the rest of the skull and the mechanics that go behind it and everything else, and it wakes up and it becomes this monster terrorizing this apartment block, and it's super freaking cool. um and there's a lot. I won't go too much into the film about um what it was like to make it and the career of the
Yeah.
director after that, because there's a lot you can read about that, and you can do a whole podcast about the film and the impact of it and everything else. And the director, Richard Stanley's director, by the way, is a bit of an interesting figure. But really really cool movie, visually stunning.
Yeah.
And it's got horror elements and cyberpunk elements, but it kind of falls in that same tech noir genre that Terminator is in. So big recommendation. I don't know if it's necessarily a horror film, but it has horror
Yeah.
aspects to it. So
Okay.
really cool. The
Yeah.
90s, I'd like to add a few more really quickly
Oh, you've
again.
got some more for me. Okay.
Yes. Okay. So talking about remakes, you talked about remakes earlier, and immediately to my mind, I didn't write it down, but it comes up to my mind is the remake of The Blob. The
Oh,
Blob in the 1990s, really fun. I
you
really
remade it.
like it in the 90s, and it's really really good, and it's really violent. It's really cool. Not a lot of people talk about it. Really great film. It should be talked about. I
Okay.
want. I really like it. Then there's. I'm going to come up with some films that are in the East. So let's go to Asia. So very very fun zombie punk rock movie called Wild Zero, about a man who faces down an aliens turning people into zombies, and is supported by his favorite band, who's a real band, a punk rock band from Japan. And I think it's Guitar Wolf, Guitar Bass, and all those guys. Anyhow, but like it's a really cool punk rock zombie film from Japan, totally bonkers, really visually cool. So Wild Zero, I'm going to give up there. Another film which I rarely get scared by horror films. I rarely see a horror film that really, really scares me. But the horror film that scared me more than anything, and looking back at it now, you're like, oh, okay, but is Ringu, aka The Ring, the first Japanese version. The Ring is a Japanese film about
Yeah.
like a haunted VHS tape. You watch it, and then 3 days later, you get a phone call and you die. Or you get a phone call, and 3 days later, you die. Um,
Okay.
and at the time I was really getting into Asian cinema because I went to Thailand a lot growing up, and I saw a lot of Hong Kong films. I hadn't seen that many Japanese films. I love Japanese cinema so much. And Ringu, aka The Ring, we're all watching it, a bunch of people, student dorm, whatever, and we're sitting there, we're watching this film, and then in the last few minutes, everybody went, "Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit!" Like something happens in the last few minutes of the film, and everybody was like, "Oh my god!" And everybody just went up in their seats like that, going, "That is the most terrifying thing." The end of that film, it is a film that builds very bravely, builds up to like a resolve. Screenplay and script builds up to one resolve. Now imagine if you screw that up, you've got no movie. But in this case, that film almost more than any other film, it builds up to this one final resolve, and it is so good. So the original Ringu, highly recommend.
Okay.
Another film talking about people who make Paul W. Sanderson, Event Horizon. I don't know if you've seen Event Horizon. It kind of is like, if you like Alien, you'll like Event Horizon. Haunted house in space. A ship, someone builds a spaceship, and it has the way to, they think it can jump through wormholes or black holes to travel from one end of space to another very quickly. But it turns out they launch a ship and it disappears for a number of years after going through the black hole, and all of a sudden it reappears, and they go, let's go to it and find out. The crew on the ship is all dead, and they find out that the spaceship didn't go through the black hole from one point of space to another. It went through a black hole, went to hell, and came back. And everything on the ship is alive and possessed. It's really cool. Event Horizon.
Wow.
That was Paul W.S. Anderson did Mortal Kombat, then he did Event Horizon, and then he did Resident Evil. And somewhere between Event Horizon and Resident Evil, I guess something happened. But Event Horizon is a really cool movie. I saw it in the cinema and I freaking loved it.
Okay.
Anyway, that's it. But that's not an American film. It's more a British film. But then I've got to give a shout out to Hong Kong really quickly. So my last two films, one of which is called Biozombie, Dawn of the Dead in a Hong Kong mall. It's called Biozombie. Very fun. It's like Dawn of the Dead, but in a Hong Kong mall. So a lot less space, very comic booky, really fun. I love Biozombie. The director, Wilson Yip, would later go on and direct the Ip Man films and stuff like that. So, but Biozombie is tons of fun. I met the actor, Sam Lee, who's one of the lead actors in that. And I was speaking to him about his movies. And when I brought up Biozombie, he was like, "Oh my God, you've seen Biozombie." Oh, he's doing all the zombie moves. I loved making that movie. So Sam Lee's in the film, and Lee Chan-sam is his Chinese name. And he loved making that movie. And you can see that he loved making that movie because he's great. Jordan Chan's in it as well. And yeah, really, really fun film, Biozombie. And I'm hoping that Eureka or 88 Films or one of the people that we do all the audio commentaries for eventually pick up that movie, because man, that movie's got to get seen more in the West. It is great. Biozombie.
Right. That sounds really good.
And then my last few recommendations from the 90s. So this is a film I know these series of films will never, ever, ever, I think, see a Western release. Like if it happens, I'd be happy. I'll audio commentaries, maybe, well, for a bunch of them, not all of them. It's the Troublesome Night series from Hong Kong. So they're anthology ghost films from Hong Kong, and they're very unique, in which I did another podcast talking about Hong Kong ghost films with the Hong Kong Cinema Appreciation Society. And we just talked about Hong Kong film movies more. And I mentioned Troublesome Night films as my top recommended films, because not only are they good, are they fun Hong Kong ghost films, a bit of comedy and ghosts and horror and everything. If you really want to see what local Hong Kong society kind of looks like and is into and stuff like that, you should watch the Troublesome Night films. Now, the catch is there are 19 of them in the series. There are 19 Troublesome Night films, 19. But 1 to 6 are really good. And they're directed by a guy named Herman Yao, who also directed like some Hong Kong slasher / horror films like The Untold Story and Ebola Syndrome and everything else.
Yeah.
And he's known for those things. When I met him and I asked him about the Troublesome Night films, he looked at me and goes, "You've seen the Troublesome Night films?" Because no Westerner basically ever talks about those. But you can get a hold of them. They're on Blu-ray now in Hong Kong, and they've got English subtitles. So if you can get a hold of them.
Okay.
But the Troublesome Night films, if you like Hong Kong, if you're interested in Hong Kong and you want to see something great, Troublesome Night 1 to 6. Great fun films, especially parts 1, 3, and 5, and 6. Don't bother with 2 and 4 unless you're really into it. But 2 is okay, but 4 is like not so grand. But yeah, Troublesome Night films, really good. So yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you.
That's for the 80s. Yeah.
Thank you. I will watch those. I was in Hong Kong in the 90s, so I think it's my duty to watch those films.
A lot of them were shot in the 90s, and you'll recognize all the space. Incidentally, Troublesome Night 2, I was talking to Mike Leader, who I do the audio commentaries with. Hello, Big Mike. And we, in Troublesome Night 2, there's a scene in which you were driving a motorcycle. One guy wipes out so hard in one of his motorcycles, but the camera's not close on him. So I reckon in the scene somebody wiped out and they just kept it in the film. It's pretty interesting to watch that. They're like, oh, production value, keep it in there. So
Yeah.
really fun. But Troublesome Night films, really good. So and they deserve more respect, especially an actor. Louis Koo's in all of them. A whole bunch of actor named Simon Loy, who's known as the Ghost King. And he basically he had ghost radio shows, he wrote ghost books, he was in ghost movies, he literally was the Ghost King of the 90s.
Yeah.
And if you want to see a lot of Hong Kong ghost films, his name is usually attached there, along with another actress named Helen Lunlaw, who's in a lot of stuff as well. But yeah, those guys, basically, yeah, you got to give a shout out for Hong Kong ghost films. I'm in Hong Kong, and I got to give a shout out to those guys. So Troublesome Night films, Simon Law, Helen Law, Louis Coco Tinlock, really good. So yeah.
We catch up with Arne tomorrow on the 2000s and 2010s. See you then.